areas of retinal pathology, photodynamic therapy and fluorescein angiography, navigated and micropulse laser, diagnostics and ROP. For the first time in ophthalmic practice, he used and optimized the Pascal for the treatment of active ROP. Dr. Volodin is a doctor of medical sciences, professor of the Russian Laser Academy of Science. He is a member of the World Society of Pediatric Ophthalmology and Strabismus, the European Society of Pediatric Ophthalmology and Strabismus, and EURETINA. In 2016, he was elected as an executive secretary of the Russian Society of Ophthalmologists. Dr. Volodin will be speaking on spectral OCT angiography, NFAS, in detecting morphological changes of the RPE in patients with CSR. Thank you.
Good morning for everyone, dear chairmen, dear colleague. First of all, I would like to thank the scientific and organizing committee of All Indian Ophthalmological Society for the kind invitation to take part in this huge scientific congress. So today I'd like to talk about the role of spectral OCT angiography in phase mode in detecting on morphological changes of the retinal pigment epithelium before and after selective micropulse laser exposure in patients with central serous choroiditinopathy. It's well known that CSC is widespread disease, relatively widespread disease, and characterized by detachment of the neurosensory retina or detachment of retinal pigment epithelium, usually localized in the macular region in the fovea with an accumulation of subretinal fluid. The basis of pathogenesis of CSC is choroidal dysfunction, leading to disruption of the barrier and absorption functions of RPE, which contributes to the leakage of fluid from the choriocapillaris through the damaged extra-hematoretinal barrier in the subretinal space. It should be noted that the key features of CSC are as follows. The possibility of spontaneous resolution of subretinal fluid, high recurrency rate of the neurosensory retinal detachment, mainly patients of the young working age, high visual functions, and frequent localization in the foveal avascular zone. All the above defines the current requirements for the treatment of this disease: high efficacy with minimal risk of side effects. So structural changes in the retinal pigment epithelium in the form of its defects or detachments in central serous choroiditinopathy play a key role in the development of the disease. The RPE defects may lead to subretinal fluid accumulation and, as a result, to consequent neurosensory retinal detachment. Nowadays, the generally accepted approach for identifying points of leakage is to use of fluorescein angiography. However, due to the possibility of systemic side effects for the patient, it remains relevant to search for non-invasive methods for identifying pathological changes of the RPE for planning and conducted targeted laser treatment. For the achievement of positive clinical effect, a clear definition of the topographic localization of RPE defects associated with point of leakage on FA is required. To identify the above pathological changes in the retinal pigment epithelium, the use of non-invasive diagnostic methods such as OCT angiography in phase mode is promising. So the purpose of our study is to evaluate the morphological changes of the RPE by OCT tomography angiography in phase mode before and after selective micropulse laser radiation in patients with central serous choroiditinopathy, determine the correspondence between the topographic location of defects and detachments of RPE on the OCT angiogram in phase mode and leaking points on the fluorescein angiography. We study 20 patients, 21 eyes with CSC before and after selective laser micropulse treatment. In the first step of the diagnostic research, all patients underwent fluorescein angiography. Then we used high-resolution optical coherence tomography with function of OCT-A in phase mode using a layer with an optimal thickness that corresponded topologically to the RPE shape, and local changes and RPE defects were analyzed. So at this slide, the OCT methods in phase mode opens the new possibilities in studying the state of RPE and its morphological changes. CSC, which allows a non-invasive and detailed study of the selected tissue layer of controlled thickness, which is attached to the RPE. So, OCT tomograph OptoView with angio-CT function in phase mode allows to identify defects and detachments of RPE with a precise localization relative to the retinal vascular network. So at this slide you can see the precise localization of RPE defects on OCT-A in phase mode. So it should be noted that the correct interpretation of tomograms, it's necessary to carefully differentiate RPE defects from possible artifacts on phase images. In the second step of the research, all patients underwent selective laser treatment in the micropulse mode with individual selection of parameters using a laser navigation system, Navilas 577S. After 2 weeks and 1 month after laser treatment, an analysis of the laser exposure area was carried out using the OCT-A in phase mode and linear scanning. In this regard, the use of technology of navigation laser treatment implemented on the Navilas equipped with a micropulse mode allows us to develop an individual treatment plan based on the digital fundus image and the data of multimodal diagnostics. After that, a treatment plan is created by placing laser application on the points of leakage. Additionally, caution zones are installed to avoid laser irradiation and entering certain fundus structures, as well as for better outer tracking system operation. On this slide shows the creation of a plan after applying OCT in phase mode to a colored digital photo of the fundus. We determined the energy parameters of the micropulse regime, which are presented on this slide, with a selective and effective effect on the RPE. As a result of our research in the first step of our study, we revealed the following morphological changes. Single RPE defects revealed in 5 cases, multiple RPE defects in 7 cases. In 9 cases, we see slit-like RPE detachment, and the combination of slight leak detachment and the defect of RPE revealed in 3 cases. So the sizes of the detected RPE defects range from 23 to 171 microns, and they had predominantly round shape. Height of the slit-like RPE detachment varied from 75 to 123 millimeter, and maximal linear diameter from 253 to 480 microns. It should be noted that in all cases, defects and detachment of RPE diagnosed by OCT in phase mode was correspondent with the leaking points and areas of diffuse leakage on the dye according FA. So at this slide you can see the comparison of FA on CT and A data. In the second step of research, it was noted that in the period of 4 to 3 weeks after laser treatment, the defects were closed and RPE detachment fit in all patients, which resulted in resorption of the subretinal fluid and reattachment of the narrow sensory retina. And in this clinical case, you can see the positive clinical effect on the OCT and with a complete resorption of subretinal fluid in 4 weeks. So, in conclusion, our preliminary results show that OCT angiography in in-phase mode is a non-invasive, highly informative diagnostic tool that allows to identify morphological changes of the RPE with a precise localization relative to the retinal vascular network, which make it possible to plan and accomplish topographically oriented laser exposure based on OCT navigation, aiming in the area of defects and detachment of RPE, as well as to monitor the dynamics of these changes after selective laser treatment. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Any questions from the audience?
The treatment is based on fluorescein angiogram.
We perform treatment based on the OCT and on in-phase mode. We revealed the RPE defects and localized it, and then conduct a topography-oriented focal laser treatment for the defects in micropulse regime.
Suppose the RPE defects will not leak in fluorescein angiogram. You may get atrophic areas. Suppose the RPE defects will not leak, whether that requires treatment.
We studied the correspondence between the points of leakage on the FA and the defects. And so when the defects of RPE is round shaped and the size is more than 50 microns, so in most cases the correspondence of leakage and the presence of the defect were revealed.
Thank you. So,
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fadra. It was a wonderful talk. So now we'll go ahead and start our IC on pachychoroid disease spectrum, unraveling the mysteries. So the first talk is by Dr. Anirudh Agarwal, and he'll be covering the topic of uncovering the unseen, that is inception and etiopathogenesis in pachychoroidopathy. Dr. Anirudh, please.
Very good morning. So I'll be discussing very briefly the pathology and the etiology of the pachychoroid spectrum of diseases. Before we start, we all know that the choroid is responsible for the external 1/3 of the vascular supply of the retina, and the structural and functional integrity of the retina. It's very vital for the choriocapillaries to remain healthy so that the RPE and the photoreceptors can function normally. Any compromised volume or flow in the circulation can result in dysfunction of the photoreceptors and the RPE. The choroidal blood supply is derived from the branches of the anterior and posterior ciliary arteries. Now, what is pachychoroid? So pachychoroid spectrum is a recent description of a group of clinical entities that have a common characteristic of thickened choroid, and they share an underlying pathologic mechanism. However, it's just not a very plain, simple, thick choroid that constitutes pachychoroid, and therefore you should not synonymously use pachychoroid with just thick choroid that you can see in several conditions. So what are the components of pachychoroid? Now these components you may not always investigate. For example, the component number 1 would be a regional choroidal hyperpermeability on ICG angiography. The second component, which is again very important, is the increased choroidal thickness. Apart from that, you would have pathologically dilated outer choroidal vessels, which are termed as pachyvessels, and you may have club-shaped posterior terminal morphology of the pachyvessels. What is very important in pachychoroid is the presence of attenuation and thinning of choriocapillaries, as well as the satellar vessels which are overlying these pachyvessels. So very simply, if you have one sentence, the etiology of pachychoroid, The common characteristics are presence of a thick choroid with dilated and hyperpermeable vessels, and these result in focal defects of the Bruch's membrane and RPE disruption, and eventually this leads to serous retinal detachment. The spectrum of pachychoroid is actually increasing from the original descriptions which have been given very recently, about 2014. Initially, we included only the CSC, pachychoroid pigment epitheliopathy, pachychoroid neovasculopathy, and PCV. But now you have newer entities such as pachydrusen. Jay will be speaking on that. We also have the peripapillary pachychoroid spectrum and focal choroidal excavation as a part of this spectrum. The first most important aspect in the pathogenesis of pachychoroid disease is presence of choroidal vascular hyperpermeability. Now, as you can see, the ICG is the best technique to demonstrate the presence of choroidal vascular hyperpermeability, and this is the basis of development of mechanical defects in the RPE decompensation causing serous detachments, RPE leakage, and eventually there would be a neurosensory retinal detachment. If you compare patients with choroidal hyperpermeability with those without, now these are eyes of PCV, and you can see that eyes of PCV, almost 30% eyes can have a very high prevalence of choroidal hyperpermeability on the ICG. And if you compare them with AMD, some AMD eyes may also have hyperpermeability of the choroid on the ICG, but this is much more prevalent in conditions such as PCV. Now, this is another clinico-pathological study of PCV eyes, where they have shown that if you look at the histology of the PCV lesion itself, it's a degenerated RPE Bruch's and choriocapillaries complex with the inner choroid containing largely dilated venules and arterioles. So again, the pathology will consist of the stasis of the vasculature and hyperpermeability leading to edema and degeneration, elevation of the tissue pressures, and eventually there will be the presence of the PED and other vascular changes that you see in PCV. Now, what is choroidal hyperpermeability? So there are studies which have shown presence of hyperpermeability in ICG. It basically means a multifocal area of hyperfluorescence with blurred margins on ICG. So it is definitely some factor which is read by a grader who is grading the ICG images. Now, as you can see that the image on the top are associated with hyperpermeability, where you have large vessels on the ICG, as you can see in the panel here, with blurred margins. And if you look at the ICG here down below, here you may not have an choroidal hyperpermeability as per the grader of this manuscript in 2017. So how do large choroidal vessels appear? They appear such as these on the swept source OCT. You can see these large choroidal vessels on a particular scan, and if you do an NFAS OCT, you will actually see these large choroidal vessels in the outer choroidal layers, and sometimes these large choroidal vessels may be underlying areas of retinal changes such as intraretinal fluid or serous retinal detachments. Now, this is another patient here, and you can see just beneath the PED on the image below here, you have a large pachy vessels in this patient. Thick choroid is the second most important etiopathogenetic factor related to the pachychoroid spectrum, and I have put it after the choroidal hyperpermeability because thick choroid is not the only factor which may be responsible for pachychoroid, but the vascular hyperpermeability is supposed to be more important. But nonetheless, you can see that eyes with PCV are very well known to have a thicker choroid compared to eyes with AMD. Now, this new concept of vortex vein engorgement. So if you look at an ICG image here, and the panels A and B represent the two eyes of one patient where you have an engorged vortex vein, and you have this panel C. This is another patient which shows, the arrow shows here the vortex vein is very much dilated and engorged. And the ICG, this is again a montage. The panel number D shows you the ICG which does not have this vortex vein engorgement. So there are a couple of papers on the vortex vein engorgement and whether it plays a role in pachychoroid. Again, more investigations are required. But how does the vortex vein engorgement appear? It appears with a dilated vortex vein, as you can see on the ICG in the periphery. And this could be associated with choroidal thickening and hyperpermeability. And higher prevalence of this engorgement is seen in eyes with PCV than in controls. If you do an NFAS OCT, you can see these large dilated Pachy vessels, and they're coming right up to the macular area in the center from the inner to the outer choroid, and this is again a very important etiopathogenetic factor for development of pachychoroid. Pachychoroid pigment epitheliopathy is something that more of it will be spoken about, but it basically would represent hyperreflective material above the RPE, and this is possibly the earliest stage of the RPE dysfunction or degeneration which is occurring, and this condition may progress to develop a neovasculopathy because of the development of a CNV. Again, this is related to the choroidal hyperpermeability and the breakdown of the RPE. As you can see here, this is a patient who had pachychoroid neovasculopathy, and you can see these large dilated choroidal vessels which are underlying this area of this neurosensory retinal detachment, and you have this irregular sort of a pigment epithelial detachment. Again, more of it will be spoken about, and this represents presence of an underlying CNV. So just to conclude, a lot of patients who are belonging to the Asian countries have these Pachy vessels, and you must take into account numerous associated factors such as choroidal vascular hyperpermeability, thick choroid and dilated choroidal vessels, and when you have all of these, they may lead to functional and structural abnormalities of the RPE, and these patients may eventually develop pachychoroid spectrum of disease. Of course, there are certain genetic and cytokines associated with this, but very little is known so far, and more exploratory studies have to be done in this regard. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Anirudh. You have really simplified the pathogenesis of pachychoroid. What we'll do is we'll take the questions at the end of the sessions. We'll finish all the talks first. So for the next talk, I invite Dr. Mahesh Ji to speak on pachychoroid pigment epitheliopathy and focal choroidal excavations and imaging expedition. Over to you, sir.
Should I go? Again, thank you, Jay and Anirudh, for giving me an opportunity here. Dr. Anirudh has given first slide. Okay. Given a nice overview about the pachychoroid disease spectrum. I am going to talk on two conditions: pachychoroid pigment epitheliopathy and focal choroidal excavation. Both of these, they don't have a treatment, but it is important to identify them because of long-term implications. So this, the triad of pachychoroid spectrum, we have already understood from the previous talk. There is increased choroidal thickness, dilatation of outer choroidal vessels called Pachy vessels, and attenuation of other layers of choriocapillaries. And this is a spectrum starting from pigment epitheliopathy to CSCR to PCN to PCV. This is a usual, some of them go through all these stages, some of them will not go. There are a lot of things to be known about pachychoroid clinical spectrum, but this is a usual spectrum of the diseases. So the PPE or pachychoroid pigment epitheliopathy has 2-3 typical characteristics. In fundus autofluorescence, there will be hyper and hypo-autofluorescent area. In OCT, there will be some hyperplasia of the retinal pigment epithelium, and choroid is characteristically thick. So this was the initial presentation, publication of nearly 15 years back it was done. There is Pachy vessel, and at that area there is thinning of RP. So there is, the most important thing is there is no documented evidence of subretinal fluid presently or in past, like autofluorescence is not showing a tract or anything. There is no evidence of subretinal fluid, and this pachychoroid pigment epitheliopathy may represent a form of CSC because this is also in the same spectrum. ICG can reveal choroidal hyperpermeability. So this was another picture where there is a orangish red lesion, no SRF, and at the area of Pachy vessel you can see some RP atrophy. Drusen-like reflective deposits under the layer of RP may be seen, and small RP protuberances are there due to hyperplasia of RP with irregular RP. So these are the findings of PP. ICG, as I already told, there is hyperpermeability of choroidal vessels, and this is the autofluorescence hypo-hyper mixture. This is an illustrative case where there was actually right eye has clinically pigment modeling in the macula, and there is fluid in the right eye, and left eye is dry, but you can see that protuberances, shallow PED, RP irregularities. So right eye was diagnosed as PCN based on multimodal imaging and was treated, but left eye had PPE. So same patient can have both in different eyes. Coming to the second topic given to me, that is focal choroidal excavation. This we have published an article last year in Indian Journal of Ophthalmology. I am just giving a summary of that article. This is a concavity in the choroid of unknown etiology. We don't know whether it is congenital or acquired, because I will show you some cases where it can be congenital or acquired. And even though most of them believe that it is congenital, it can be seen in pachychoroid diseases and can develop later after CNVM. This is case 1. The case 1, you can see a classic choroidal neovascular membrane, and pointer is the point. Okay, mouse only. Yeah. So here, this is the focal choroidal excavation, which was present initially itself. This is before treatment, and this is after treatment, where subretinal fluid has gone. So this is a case where CNVM has developed at the site of focal choroidal excavation. Now coming to another case, this is another classic lacy pattern in early phase with the fuzzy margin in angiogram. Here also you can see this focal choroidal excavation here with subretinal fluid. This is before treatment, and after treatment the fluid has gone. The important thing is you can see some fluid-like area at the bottom of this focal choroidal excavation. This is not SRF, this is called non-conforming focal choroidal excavation. So this should not be mistaken for fluid and treated unnecessarily. So this is a dry macula with non-conforming type of focal choroidal excavation. This is another case where there is classic CNVM leaking in late phase with subretinal fluid, and in fact after treatment it became dry here. The FC is there, conforming type of FC is there, and later it became non-conforming. So the transformation from non-conforming to conforming, conforming to non-conforming can happen in focal choroidal excavation. This should not be mistaken as a recurrence. This is another case where we had a choroidal osteoma, and that is nicely seen in this EDI with fluid, because there was hemorrhage here and there was a choroidal neovascular membrane at the side, and after treatment you can see at the edge of the choroidal osteoma there is a focal choroidal excavation coming. So this is another case. So even though there are reports that it can be congenital, we are showing some cases where it is acquired. Initially it was not present. The theory, we don't know why it happens. Some focal scarring resulting in bulging out of choroid, that is or inflammation, we are not sure. But this has to be identified. This is an OCT finding. This has to be identified so that unnecessary treatment may not be given with for fluid, and follow-up is required in these cases. So FC is an OCT based diagnosis associated with pachychoroid disease, and it can be congenital and acquired. The significance remains unknown, and monitoring is all that is required. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to next invite Dr. Jay Sheth, who is a chief instructor. He'll be speaking on pachydrusen. Is it innocuous? Jay, please.
We can take a few questions by the time they upload the presentation.
Sir, which one, sir?
Yes.
Three.
In the way of diagnosing an early pachychoroid. So is it only ICG which you can see, or you can see them on FA also?
The manuscripts which have spoken on the vortex vein engorgement have used ICG, and you may not see them on fluorescein angiography. some individuals have tried to use wide field OCT to look at the vortex vein, but it's very difficult to image. So I think the easiest way would be an ICG, but that requires a wide field ICG, or you need to
Yeah.
do a montage.
Yeah, of course, wide field. But then wide field OCT, what documentation? I mean, because then again you have to go and wide field with EDI mode.
With EDI mode or swept source.
Yeah.
So that is again very difficult, but these are the only two ways you can image the vortex veins appropriately. Fluorescein will be very difficult.
Very
You may not pick them on fluorescein. Thank you.
Okay, so we have the talk ready. So again, good morning everyone. So I'll be giving my talk on pachydusin. Is it innocuous? So pachydusin have recently been described as a unique form of drusins that are associated with an increased choroidal thickness, and they have been described in different pathological conditions, primarily in the pachychoroid disease spectrum associated with CSR or PCB, but few of the cases have also been described in patients with AMD. So now it is very easy to differentiate a pachydusin from a normal drusen. So in a normal drusen, what we see in a wet AMD, it is usually roundish in shape, seen at the macular area and with a very ill-defined margins. Whereas if we see a pachydusin, they have usually very sharp margins, and they are present throughout the posterior pole area, and there is absence of any associated pigmentary changes overlying the pachydusin, and the underlying choroid will give a more reddish hue as compared to the choroidal vessels that can be easily seen in patients with an age-related macular degeneration. Now, so this is a classic case of a pachydusin in which we can see, so these yellowish lesions are the pachydusin, which are seen correspondingly on OCT as a small RP irregularities can be seen with an increase in the choroidal thickness, and they give a staining kind of picture on ICGA. So in AMD, we know that the site of drusins is usually located in the macular area, and they can progress to either geographic atrophy in around 1/3 of these patients, or progress to CNVM in almost half of these cases. So what about pachydusin? So there's dearth of sufficient epidemiological data on this, and to fill this lacuna, we did a small study to report the prevalence of pachydusin in pachychoroidopathy, and also to determine whether they are just innocuous or at its site were analyzed longitudinally by a single masked observer. If there was any kind of disease activity, then we did further imaging in the form of ICG and fluorescein angiography. So there were 131 eyes with pachychoroidopathy with a mean age of 60 years. So it was, and we had around 36 eyes of PPE, and it was there in 45 eyes of CSR and 50 eyes of type 1 CNVM. The mean follow-up period of the study population was almost around 2 years. Now, pachydusin was observed in more than half of these eyes, that is around 53.44%, and it was seen in 41% of PPE eyes, 60% of CSR, and 56% of type 1 CNVM eyes, and the site and presence of disease activity, that is period to the disc itself, so which can be seen on the autofluorescence and also on the OCT. And then at a later stage, 1 year later, there was complete resolution of CSR that was present superior to the disc, whereas the patient again came with a recurrence of CSR. So in this, so the pachydusin that were there superior to the disc were the site of CSR formation later, 18 months later. And this is the second case in which there were foci of pachydusin present inferotemporal to the macular area and also in the peripapillary region. Now, around 1 year later, the patient presented with a small hemorrhage in the inferotemporal location with presence of disease activation in the form of subretinal fluid and a shallow DLS in that area. When we did an ICG, it showed presence of a small irregular network. And again, after 5 injections, there was significant improvement in the disease activation, but it converted to presence of polypoidal lesion in that location. So this is a zoomed in image showing the area of pachydusin and the hemorrhage that presented at the same location. It's not working. Yeah, and this is the third and the final case what I would be showing. So these patients also had a temporal cluster of pachydusin and a peripapillary location. 3 years later, the patient presented with a circinate maculopathy kind of picture, which you can see in this location, and also there were presence of temporal cluster of polyps 3 years later, which came at the site of these pachydusin. And also in the peripapillary location, this small pachydusin, and if we do a corresponding ICD, it showed presence of the feeder vessel of the branching vascular network that developed in the same location. I think yeah. So what could be the pathophysiology? So as we know, as Anirudh has slightly pointed out, there is a dilatation of the vessels of the Hairless layer, and which causes a choriocapillary compression, which can lead to a local micro-hypoxic environment. And along with that, there are also other changes, including chronic inflammatory changes. So they may lead to development of disease activation in the form of RPE damage, which can lead to leakage in CSR and also lead to CNVM formation. And one more hypothesis that supports this is that in presence of in wet AMD, the location of the disease activation, that is geographic atrophy, as well as CNVM formation, is located in the macular area, as well as the drusen's are present in the macular area itself. Whereas if we, the slides are not. Okay. I'm sorry, yeah. So whereas in patients in the pachychoroid disease spectrum, the pachydrusen is located throughout the posterior pole area and also beyond the arcade in these patients. And also, so when there is a disease activation, so like in CSR, we can see the leak is present not only in the macular location, but also it can be present at any of these locations. And also the polyps. So this supports the hypothesis that these drusens are present throughout the posterior pole and in the peripapillary area. So the disease activation also happens at any of these locations. So till date, we knew the current study shows that the prevalence of pachydrusen in CSR eyes was much more as compared to the other eyes. And we know that drusens are a precursor for geographic atrophy and CNVM development in wet AMD. But this is probably the first study to demonstrate that pachydrusen could be a potential risk factor for development of disease activity in the form of leakage on CSR, and also it may lead to development of type 1 CNVM in the form of pachychoroid neovasculopathy and PCV. So this is a very interesting finding what we observed, and maybe a potential much more studies can be done on this, and whether pachydrusen can itself be, we can treat it and to prevent further disease activation in the form of CNVM formation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. I'd now like to invite Dr. Avnish, who will be speaking on emerging concept of the peripapillary pachychoroid spectrum. Again, please keep your questions for the last. While we have the discussion, we can go over all the presentations. Meanwhile, while Avnish is setting up, we can take one single question from somebody if you have any. Yes.
Yes.
Could you distinguish between the choroid versus pachychoroid? Because you said there is a distinction to be made. How is that?
So the pachychoroid should not only have a thick choroid, but you should also have compression of the choriocapillaries. And that can be seen on the OCT scan as thinning of the layer of the choriocapillaries. So that is a very important factor. Along with that, if you do an ICG, you may have presence of hyperpermeability of the choroid. So that is again something that goes in favor of pachychoroid. There is no cutoff value for the thickness of choroid, but you have to look at these associated features with the thickened choroid.
From what you say, we start with the thick choroid. In the spectrum of diseases, we can put one above everything else and say thick choroid, then the pachychoroid, and then the subsequent sequence of events. Would that be the continuum of things?
So you may have a patient of thick choroid who may not, who may never develop pachychoroid.
Can you take the cutoff of more than 300 microns of OVE, because this is what usually book says. 300 microns is the normal thickness.
You may have patients who have higher or thicker choroid, and for example, you may have a patient of VKH who has 500 thickness, but that is not pachychoroid because you don't have compression of choriocapillaries.
It is not just a pachychoroid, but presence of a focal dilated vessel itself can form a part of the spectrum. Because a patient with a thick choroid may have a normal thickness of the Hairless and the Sattler's layer with a normal choriocapillary. So that would not form a part of the pachychoroid spectrum. There has to be a focal compression of the choriocapillary layer, which shows that the disease process has started. So not all patients with a thick choroid may eventually get into the spectrum.
What I want to know is, along with the other features, and if you have a measurement of choroid of more than say 300 or 400 microns, should you take it as a factor, or
There are multiple studies who have given different cutoff criteria for that. Like few of the studies say 200 microns, few have say 278 microns. So it is still debatable. That's it. Okay, so we'll go ahead with the talk and we'll continue the discussion later. Yes, Dr. Avnish, please.
Good morning all. I'll be speaking about the concept of peripapillary pachychoroid syndrome. It's not going down the slides.
Click on the slide.
So before coming to peripapillary pachychoroid syndrome, as the question was asked, what exactly is pachychoroid spectrum disease? It could be focal or diffuse choroidal thickening associated with pachyvessels, that is the dilatation of the halars, and then the inner retinal layer, in the inner choroidal layer, that is the Chatelet and the choriocapillaries, they seem to be attenuated. And they would be, on an ICG, they would be diseases which are present from pachychoroid pigment epitheliopathy to focal choroidal excavation. I would be more speaking about peripapillary pachychoroid syndrome. So basically, a peripapillary pachychoroid syndrome is something in which the findings of a pachychoroid disease is present, but in contrast to the subfoveal area, it is usually seen in the region surrounding the optic nerve. Again, it is associated with increased choroidal thickness, dilated halars, and nasally there is presence of intraretinal or subretinal fluid in these patients, and they may be associated with, because of the congestion, hyperemic disc, optic nerve head edema. So this is one of the photos where this is a patient who has a normal choroid. This is a patient who has a chronic CSI. You can see the thickened choroid. There is presence of a dilated halars layer. There is attenuation of the inner choroidal layers. And when you see a patient with a pachychoroid, peripapillary pachychoroid syndrome, instead of here you can see the nasal choroid is thinned out, but here you see that it is highly dilated, and then the other features of pachychoroid spectrum disease are present. So normally these patients, they have a very good visual acuity of 6/9 to 6/12. These are seen in patients who are hyperopic. The axial length is usually less, and they are associated with other features of pachychoroid spectrum disease. So clinically, you may have features of hyperpigmentation. You may, the findings which you see is like the discs are almost like congested or crowded. There may be associated some choroidal folds. And when you do an autofluorescence in these patients, you would see mottled autofluorescence and gravitational tracking around the peripapillary area. So now when you do an OCT image of these patients, you would see that the nasal choroid is it is thickened as compared to the subfoveal, and the temporal just is the least which is thickened. You can see these three patients which we can see. Associated with this, you would see presence of intraretinal and subretinal fluid, and later on it may develop because of congestion and all, the RP atrophy may develop, and that can lead to decreased vision in these patients. When you do an FFA of these patients, you would see presence of hyperfluorescence around the peripapillary area, and in later stages you may see a ring-like formation around the disc which would leak, would mimic a disc leak in these sorts of patients. But when you do an MRI on these sorts of patients, the MRI may be normal because there is no associated optic nerve pathology, and later on there would be presence of gravitational tracts. An ICG would pick up a presence of dilated vessels, but because of these dilated, there would be presence of peripapillary choroidal hyperpermeability. The postulated hypothesis for intraretinal edema is basically because of peripapillary choroidal congestion, there is increased hydrostatic pressure, and that leads to RP dysfunction and leading to intraretinal edema. So whatever data which we have, the treatment options could be injections or giving mineralocorticoid antagonist or just observing. More or less, there is no much of an evidence which one is superior than the other one. So this is a study which we did, which we compared our patients. We had around 8 patients with this sort of disease, and this was compared with one of the paper which was present in the literature. In that, in our study, we had that it had similar findings, that it was more commonly seen in males. The visual acuity was almost comparable. The nasal choroid was thicker in our patients, but not significant. The choroidal folds were mostly seen in our patients, and there was presence of intraretinal fluid with RP alterations. So to conclude, a PPS is characterized by features of abnormal, it is similar to PDS, but it is in the peripapillary area. It would be associated with intraretinal or sub-RP fluid with RP alterations, but it requires larger spectrum of studies to determine the treatment protocol and for further evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Avnish. Now I would like to call Dr. George Manath to give his talk on CSCR.
So I have tried all the three, but
Nothing.
it is not having much of a.
Yeah, I would like to make a point actually, but then though this is a variant of CSCR, patients, at least the low fluence PDT works well in these patients. Yeah, no, in the sense you have to avoid the disc obviously, multi-spot. Multiple, depending on where it is, sometimes the leak may. So avoiding the optic nerve, when we did at least 5 patients, all of them resolved well. But because eplenaron doesn't work in these patients, and you cannot use focal laser, so.
Do you treat the nasal dilated choroidal vessels also, or just the temporal?
No,
Because
only
that may be nasal and both.
but which one causing the macular
Macular.
fluid?
Okay.
So, I mean, if you do ICG, there will be hyperpermeable areas on the nasal to the disc. I mean, multifocal areas. So, all need not be.
Yeah.
So, but which patients do you actually go in and choose to treat? Because they would sometimes there is just some intraretinal.
Not the
cystic species.
intraretinal patient who has symptomatic and there is
patients of
subretinal
vision.
fluid. Not only intraretinal, they'll have subretinal fluid at the macula. That is only indication to treat actually.
Right. SR.
There are some chronic cases where the posterior cystoid changes are there which will not respond.
Not respond.
Can we have the slides?
So you can have it here. It's ready here. It's ready here. What's it? Yes, sir.
So good morning everybody. Among the pachychoroid that we are discussing, the commonest entity we have central serous chorioretinopathy. So this used to be a very simple disease and with a serous macular detachment in a young male usually with a point leakage at the macula and generally self-limiting disease with good prognosis. So then we started seeing some of these atypical variants like diffuse RP epitheliopathy, subfoveal leaks and subfoveal serous PEDs and then large leaking PEDs with the leaking from the edge. These are difficult to be treated with focal laser or any other things, or we started seeing these kind of fibrinous, acute fibrinous type of CSC with diffuse leaks, sometimes exudative retinal detachment. These are all atypical forms of central serous retinopathy which are difficult to treat. And the subretinal fibrinous appears as subretinal hyperreflective material under the macula, and also sometimes as bridging tissue or the contact sign dipping, neurosensor retina dipping down to touch the retinal pigment epitheliopathy. So these are atypical forms of CSC. Basically, there's been a paradigm shift in the pathophysiology, first from vasospasm to disease of the RP, and now it is a disease of the choroid and under the pachychoroid spectrum. What exactly causes this, whether it's an inner choroidal ischemia or inflammation of the choroidal stroma or stasis from the outflow drainage from the choroid, we don't know, but basically there is a increased choroidal hydrostatic pressure and choroidal hyperpermeability and secondary loss of RP function, and it results in subretinal fluid. There has been a recent suggestion that it could be familially predisposed, autosomally dominant, the other eye having of CSR patient, almost all of them having thick choroid and pachychoroid. So whether we don't know whether hormones like cortisol is driving this kind of pachychoroid or is it autosomally dominant. So what we learned from enhanced depth imaging and swept source OCT is already we have described. Somebody was asking whether a thick choroid, this is the choriocapillary attenuation that we are talking about, which overlies an area of pachy vessel. So this is the pathology. This is what we call as pachychoroid, not just a thick choroid. And you can see this is the choriocapillary attenuation and inner choroidal ischemia overlying a PED usually overlies in this area. So this is what we are calling. So it could be a diffuse thickening or it could be a focal thickening like that. The other area need not be diffusely thickened. What we learned from the binarized enhanced depth imaging is that the inner choroid has hyperreflective areas which suggest a choroidal, inner choroidal inflammation as a pathophysiology, or it could be that the outer choroidal dilatation. These are seen as large hyporeflective areas in the outer choroid. So this is what we learned from the binarized EDI images. And coming to the ICG, there will be an early filling delay, dilated choroidal vessels, and these are the areas which we were telling about, multifocal areas of mid-phase ICG, choroidal hyperpermeability. This could be almost depending on which quadrant is involved, all quadrants could also be involved. So coming to a variant of CSR, we have seen that pachychoroid spectrum, these kind of patients having serous macular detachment at the fovea, we have seen superior CSR, typical smokestack leak of CSR, but the OCT is not showing a serous PED, but you see a notched PED with polyp on the undersurface of the RP, and ICG reveals polyps in the inferior macula. So we are seeing active CSR, active PCV in the same eye together, almost confirming the pachychoroid spectrum here. So this has been published in Retina Journal. Somebody was asking about ICG angiography. This is the ultra wide field ICG image showing that this patient has a temporal choroidal hyperpermeability on ICG. Ultra wide field ICG shows that his supratemporal, infratemporal ampullae of the vortex veins are dilated and congested, giving a hypothesis that whether these patients are having an outflow obstruction or stasis causing the increased choroidal hydrostatic pressure. Whether it's outflow congestion, we don't know, but we have seen patients who are having bilateral chronic CME fibrinous variant with exudative retinal detachment, having an anterior choroidal loculation of fluid like this, peripheral CDs, while they were on follow-up, and diffuse kind of leakage, fibrinous CSR with peripheral CDs. So this also suggests an outflow congestion, something like a uveal effusion syndrome. But these patients with anterior choroidal loculation of fluid, they beautifully respond to photodynamic therapy to the posterior leaking areas, unlike a uveal effusion syndrome. We already know that this fibrinous variant of CSR, and like the posterior choroidal loculation of fluid in CSR, first described by Spade and Ryan with Swepsore's OCT, they found that outer to the pachy vessels, you could see a dissociated or a interdigitated posterior choroidal loculation of fluid. And this happens in around 60% of the cases if you have a Swepsore's imaging. And this is nothing but when the choroidal stroma is saturated beyond 500 microns, fluid could accumulate not only under the RP, but it could accumulate outer to the pachy vessels in the outer choroid. So coming to the OCT angiography, in CSC, chronic CSC, these kind of dark areas are seen colocalized to the subretinal fluid, suggesting an inner choroidal ischemia as a pathogenesis of chronic CSR. Another finding is abnormal choroidal vessels like this, ball of wool pattern or an indistinct tangle pattern. This ball of wool pattern is definitely shown to be a secondary CNVM in chronic CSR, whereas indistinct tangle pattern is a loose network which may or may not be CNVM. So now the question is, why do you want OCT angiography? We have already seen OCT, ICG, fluorescein angiography. But the question is, when you have a patient with chronic CSC, you cannot rule out pachyneovasculopathy in that neovascularization in that patient, because fluorescein just shows a diffuse late leakage, and you cannot differentiate chronic CSR diffuse leak from a late leakage of a neovascular membrane. And just to see that, a good example is here. This patient was referred for photodynamic therapy for a chronic CSR with subfoveal diffuse RP epitheliopathy. The other eye is having a pachychoroid. This eye is having a flat irregular PED, and this flat irregular PED is overlying a pachy vessel and subretinal fluid, and this is the pachy vessel and this is the flat irregular PED. OCT angiography shows deeper avascular layer, a beautiful neovascular network which overlies this area of flat irregular PED. This is the pachyneovasculopathy which could be missed with a fluorescein angiography. Treatment is anti-VEGF injection, not focal laser or photodynamic therapy. So OCT angiography is highly sensitive and non-invasive investigation which helps in picking up these lesions. So another differential diagnosis for CSC is on the anterior edge of a posterior staphyloma. You could see CSR like fluid. And also fluorescein angiography might show a mimicking type of leakage also. But ICG is the catch here. It shows hypocyanescence rather than choroidal hyperpermeability in CSR. Also, this kind of subretinal fluid could be associated with a irregular PED. We have to suspect an occult CNVM rather than a chronic CSR. Also, fibrinous CSR should not be confused with this kind of a subretinal fluid. This is the toxochorioretinitis, which is a mimicker of chronic CSR, with especially the fibrinous variant of CSR. Coming to the treatment, low dose and low fluence PDT is the current gold standard for chronic CSR, which causes a short-term choriocapillary hyperperfusion, and long-term it causes a choroidal vascular remodeling, thereby reducing even the recurrence of CSR is reduced after low fluence or low dose PDT. Both has been shown to be almost equally effective, and our results in Indian eyes shows that almost 85% of the patients with 6 to 8 months of chronic CSR resolved with a single sitting of low fluence PDT, which is comparable to the Western literature. So these are some of the case example. Diffuse RP epitheliopathy, subfoveal leak, and low fluence PDT has resulted in a resolution. Or even patients with large serous PEDs under the macula bilaterally, and these kind of diffuse leaking PEDs, no other treatment would be effective in such situation. And following the low fluence PDT, the PED has disappeared, the fluid has disappeared, and you see that almost the ISOS ellipsoid zone is intact now after treatment and 6/6 vision. So another variant is inferior bullous retinal detachment, and you have a diffuse leak under the macula. We use a subthreshold diode laser. So this subthreshold diode laser to these areas of low leakages results in more than one sitting may be required. It results in these kind of diffuse RP leakage stops. Another entity now we have is micropulse yellow laser. Though it has been shown to be effective, the parameters including the duty cycle and power needs further evaluation, and we need a validation of these results, and the uniform parameters need to be described. Lastly, I would show these kind of cases which are nothing but cystoid macular degeneration in chronic CSR, and these are poor prognostic indicators. Also, when you have a subfoveal PEDs and this kind of fluid, and there is an acquired vitelliform lesion overlying a serous PED in CSR, post PDT almost no response. So this is also a guarded visual prognosis OCT biomarker for treatment of chronic CSC. So I would conclude saying that we have learned from the imaging studies that choroidal hyperpermeability and increased choroidal hydrostatic pressure is evidenced by Swepsource and enhanced depth imaging OCT. OCT angiography has shown an inner choroidal ischemia. CSE is now, as already discussed, part of the pachychoroid disease spectrum. Low fluence PDT or low dose PDT is the current gold standard for chronic CSC. Subthreshold micropulse, yellow, and diode lasers are alternative treatment options, and we have to understand the mimickers and OCT biomarkers, which are important pointers to treatment outcomes. Thank you for patient listening.
Thank you, sir. I'd now like to invite Dr. Jay again, who will be speaking on a challenging topic of type 1 CNV in pachychoroidopathy. Is it pachychoroid neovasculopathy or PCV?
The nasal ampullae is engorged, maybe it is peripapillary, and if the temporal ampullae is
There are
this
ICG
Very
Yes,
good.
sir.
Especially by the Jemmy Chung's group, Singapore.
Yeah.
So they have found that depending on where your choroidal hyperchoroidal, those quadrants are dilated.
There are a couple of papers published, sir, in that regards.
CSR may become a surgical this thing with where you have to cut a window in the
We have done. We have done. Patients with not in normal CSR.
X-rated RD.
X-rated RD with peripheral CDs. So that
Scleral window.
under publication. It has to be.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Sir, what is the difference between are all irregular flat PEDs BB?
Can you use a mic, please?
No, it has to, it can happen. No,
We'll-
I would say it is an extension of double layer sign. So double layer sign can be seen in chronic CSC as well as in neovascularization. So hyperreflectivity under the RP would be the thing to look for. And unfortunately, in a setting like chronic CSR or some, fluorescent angiography may not pick up this lesion. So that is the only indication
OCT
for me,
angio.
for me, only indication of TAP which is very useful is this situation.
Lateral elongation of fibroscular purity can be a
Predictor for this thing.
Since we have 2 more talks to go, I think we'll just go on to the talks and then we can take up in the panel.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead with my talk on redefining type 1 CNVM in pachychoroidopathy on multimodal imaging. Yeah.
Need to click on this.
So as it has already been discussed, the spectrum of pachychoroid spectrum, it primarily starts with a pachychoroid pigment epitheliopathy with just few RP changes, goes on to CSR, and then very long-standing CSR changes may lead to development of a type 1 CNVM, that is pachychoroid neovasculopathy, and at the end stage it may develop a dilatation, aneurysmal dilatation at the end, what is known as polyps. So the pachychoroid neovasculopathy was first described by Bailey Frood and Claudine Pang around 4 years back. So it was primarily a type 1 CNVM that developed due to long-standing CSR changes. Now there is no established definition for pachychoroid neovasculopathy. The studies that have been done till date, they have various inclusion criteria, including presence of a CNVM, a subfoveal choroidal thickness more than 200 microns, absence of any drusins or presence of non-extensive drusins, and other characteristic OCT changes of CSE or pachychoroid characteristic, including a choroidal vascular hyperpermeability, as Dr. Anirudh had told, and along with RPE irregularities. So, like this is a classic case of a pachychoroid neovasculopathy, in which there, on clinical examination, there will be presence of just few pigmentary changes on that. And when we see the OCT, there will be presence of thickened choroid with dilated choroidal vessels, and present. This is the what Dr. George was talking about, a short irregular pigment epithelial detachment. And presence of this hyperreflectivity is very important because that is highly suggestive of a CNV present over there. If this is present as a hyporeflective, then it is more goes towards a CSR kind of picture. And on autofluorescence, it shows few hypo and hyper areas. And on ICG may not be very conclusive, or it may give to a picture of a plaque kind of lesion can be seen in that area. But the most important thing for these patients is to do an OCT angiography, which may reveal a network of vessels in that area, and that defines the treatment management for this. Example, this is a 70-year-old male who came with left eye decrease of vision since 1 year. The right eye had very long-standing changes of vision of 1 meter, and left eye at 6/18. So this is the fundus photograph, in which clinically also we can see presence of track marks in the right eye, and presence of degenerative changes in the macular area in the left eye. So on autofluorescence, we can classically see these track marks that is suggestive of very long-standing chronic CSR changes, and which can even be seen on the fluorescein angiography and ICG. Now, when we did an imaging of the other eye, there was presence of mild choroidal thickness with presence of dilated choroidal vessels, a subretinal hyperreflectivity, and a shallow irregular PED. On ICG, it showed presence of a very early network, but this OCTA was very conclusive. So this is the zoomed in image of the ICD showing this is the network of vessel, and correspondingly the network could also be seen on OCT angiography. So for this patient we went ahead and after we started the patient on intravitreal ranibizumab treatment. So after 3 doses we can see that there was improvement in the subretinal hyperreflectivity, with vision acuity also started improving, and there was reduction in the length of the DLS. And 12 months later, after 6 IVR, the vision acuity improved to 6/9. There were improvement in the network also. There was the fine branching vascular network, it reduced, but this dead tree kind of appearance persisted. That we even seen in wet AMD patients. But however, later, around 18 months later, again there was a recurrence, and we can see this fine vascular network has started developing again. So very long-standing changes of type 1 CNVM may lead to an aneurysmal terminal dilatation that is classically known as polyp. So these polyps can be located either in the subfoveal location or in the juxtafoveal, extrafoveal location, or in the peripapillary area that is very commonly seen in a peripapillary pachychoroid syndrome, or even in the peripheral location. So on OCT, these polyps will classically appear as a sharp peaked PED, or it will be like a thumb-like PED associated with the shallow DLS or double layer sign. So this is actually the network of vessels and with a terminal dilatation of the polyps. And there can even be a notching that is seen, that is classically seen in polyps, with a central hyporeflective lumen and a hyperreflective ring. The network can be seen as this shallow irregular PED. And this is just showing the feeder vessel in a very early ICG, which fills the entire network of vessels in this area. Now this is another case of a 60-year-old male who came with a right eye reduction of vision since 1 year. His visual acuity was 6/18. So there was presence of the sharp thumb-like PED in this location. And when we did an ICG, we can see the polyp with a network of vessels. And this polyp and the network of vessels can even be seen on a corresponding OCTA. So these appeared quite similar. And this patient underwent a photodynamic therapy with an intravitreal ranibizumab. And after 1 month of dose, we can see that the PED height reduced significantly. There was still presence of a subretinal fluid, but that is commonly seen after patients who undergo PDT. So that is more of an inflammatory fluid that comes after a photodynamic therapy. So this is the pre and post OCT angio, where you can see that this polyp and the network had completely resolved after doing the photodynamic therapy. And this is another case of a 75-year-old male who had right eye reduction of vision since 3 months. His visual acuity was 6/18 in that eye. Now both eyes showed presence of just RP irregularities and changes. So when we did an OCT, we can see there was a dense subretinal hyperreflectivity in that area with this shallow pigment epithelial detachment and an underlying dilated choroidal vessels. Now ICG showed very presence of very faint vascular network, which was not very much visible in that. And fluorescein angiography showed an occult CNVM kind of a picture with a late leakage. So this was classically a pachychoroid neovasculopathy in that eye, and the other eye showed presence of polypoidal lesions because it had got very long-standing changes. So this confirms the spectrum, that is the patient had a PCN in one eye and a PCV in the other eye. So is that a rule? As someone had asked whether do the patients need to undergo through all of these stages one by one. So it may not be the case. So I'll just prove that with one of my last cases. So this was a 46-year-old male who presented with blurriness of vision in 2016 since 2 years. He had a history of CSR in 2004-5, for which he had undergone a focal laser treatment. His right eye vision was 6/9 and left eye was 6/36. So these are the old laser marks that were present in both the eyes. And this is the right eye. On autofluorescence, we can see these chronic track marks can be seen, suggestive of chronic CSR changes. And presence of these intraretinal cystoid changes is also highly suggestive of a chronic CSR kind of a picture in this eye. And when we see the left eye also, we can beautifully see these track marks on fundus autofluorescence. And and there was presence of thickened choroid along with that. And these track marks can also be seen on fluorescein angiography. So 10 months later, the patient came with a further reduction in the vision, and now his visual acuity dropped to 6/60. So this is the previous and this is current. So right now the patient then developed a presence of a serous macular detachment in the macular area and also just temporal to that. So these were the track marks previously, and this is at the current visit. And we can see this roundish area of hyperautofluorescence. So that is suggestive of a new disease activity that developed in this eye after around 10 months. And on OCT, when we compare, previously there was just presence of these RP irregularity changes, but now there was appearance of the serous macular detachment that came about. So when we did an angiography for this patient, there appeared to be a polyp in this area that was not there previously. So this patient had a chronic CSR initially, and after 10 months of duration, that chronic CSR it directly progressed to development of PCV. So this was the previous ICG angiography and this is the current ICG that showed presence of this polyp that was not present previously. So this case demonstrates that it may not, that the disease may not be able to go through all the changes. So it can directly go to a PCV formation also. So just to conclude, pachychoroid neovasculopathy and PCV, they form a part of the pachychoroid disease spectrum, and multimodal imaging is the key for diagnosis and management of these patients. For an ICG is very important in these patients to identify the polyp, because it may play a very important role in managing these patients, including whether we need to do a photodynamic therapy, or for an extra foveal polyp, even a thermal laser would suffice. And as Dr. George sir said, that OCT angio is very, very important, because a lot of patients with chronic CSR, when we do an OCT angio, we see an underlying network. So that would be the reason why these patients may be having a recurrent attacks of CSR, or they may not be responding to either the eplerenone treatment or a conservative management. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. And with this, we'll come to the last talk of the IC, Dr. Anand Rajendran, who will be speaking on management of PCV, translating current evidence into clinical practice.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. This is IC. So I'll be talking to you on management PCV, as I mentioned, translating current evidence into clinical practice. So the guidelines for PCV management have been elucidated very well in these two fine articles, and I was very pleased to be part of the first one, published in the IGO a couple of years back. The second one was an expert panel review led by Dr. Adrian Coe. And this, they talk about ICG being, evaluating it as a diagnostic modality of choice. And you diagnose PCV if you find single or multiple focal nodular areas of hyperfluorescence on the ICG within the first 6 minutes. That's critical, 6 minutes. We find nodular appearance on the stereoscopic ICGA, hypofluorescent halo surrounding focal hyperfluorescence, BVNs, pulsatile filling of the polyps, focal hyperfluorescence in association with orange nodules, which you'll see, and massive submacular hemorrhage. And then you treat if it is an active symptomatic PCV, and you can consider if it's a threatening active asymptomatic PCV too. When is it considered active? When there's a drop of at least 5 letters, which is attributable to that PCV, subretinal fluid with or without intraretinal fluid. So subretinal fluid is the key thing here. PD, submacular hemorrhages, and FA evidence of leakage. So a case where you find FFA and ICG evidence of PCV with the polyp showing up better on the ICG and the washout, and the bilobe PD, as has been shown. Another case where you can see very beautifully the branch vascular network showing up, and in the later phases terminating and lighting up as polyps, and the washout, and those large PDs which have been talked about. So while ICG is the diagnostic modality of choice, we have in time come to learn of the telltale biomarkers, so to speak, on OCT. Notched PD is one of the most popular, as I've seen, steep PDs, hemorrhagic PDs, you can have serosanguineous PDs, subretinal hyperreflectivity, RP, and cavitation within the PDs. Now, PCV has obviously this therapeutic trinity associated with it, with PDT being the foremost. Anti-VEGF came up as a supplement, but has now almost challenged the role of PDT. And of course, like very often in life, combination works the best. So what is the evidence for PDT? It came from initial trials like that done by Chan et al., where PDT showed that it was a better alternative to the erstwhile thermal laser photocoagulation because of the minimal damage to the overlying retina. And almost 95% above cases had stable or improved acuity, complete absence of leakage on the FA, and almost total polyp regression. In time, it was recognized that PDT was indeed better for PCV than AMD in terms of acuity, improvement, FA leak cessation, and recurrence. And as experience with PDT for PCV grew, it was understood that there was definitive improvement in acuity, but it was kind of limited in the long term. And why was this so? Many studies found that this was largely also because of a persisting BVN for which PDT was not as effective as it was for those polyps. So it was widely used, but there was limited benefit on long term. And people tried to look at why, what factors led to improved acuity, and the Japanese found that certain factors at baseline, younger age, smaller GLD, better baseline acuity, as well as lesser baseline hemorrhage, serous macular detachments. If these are there, you probably will end up with better acuity 1 year down the line with PDT. An example of a case where standard fluence regressed a PCV well. So now coming to combination therapy, which was the game changer. The Everest started off with the primary objective looking at these 3 arms, combination, PDT with ranibizumab versus PDT monotherapy versus ranibizumab monotherapy, and looked essentially at complete regression of these polyps at month 6. So it was actually a very small study. I personally felt it was kind of rushed through for symptomatic PCV. Generally showed that combination therapy was better than PDT as well as ranibizumab monotherapy. But it really didn't look at where the polyps was exactly. So Everest 2 kind of tried to address those things, and in a much larger study, 322 odd patients, where they looked at combination therapy PDT and ranibizumab, and compared it to ranibizumab monotherapy, they dropped that PDT monotherapy arm and looked at results at 12 months and 24 months. And they found that combination was better than ranibizumab monotherapy in terms of achieving complete polyp regression over a year. At different time points, PDT combination therapy with ranibizumab was better than monotherapy at all points. And this combination is also better than ranibizumab monotherapy in terms of polyp regression over 12 months. And look at BVN size. This is very interesting. While combination therapy does better than ranibizumab monotherapy, you also note that both arms do not completely reduce BVN. BVN size keeps increasing. So we really don't have very effective therapy for BVNs as of now, but combination tends to reduce that rate of increase more than ranibizumab monotherapy. Combination is also better in terms of having a greater proportion of patients with no leakage in the study eye, greater proportion of patients with fluid-free retina, greater proportion of patients with residual disease activity at all time points leading up to that 1 year. So in a sense, average acuity was better and complete polyp regression was also better. It also had lesser number of re-injections and significantly lesser so. Fujisan did something very interesting. They looked at, okay, we have combination, but how do we combine? Do we do PDT and ranibizumab PDT first up and then anti-VEGF, or do we defer PDT? And they tried to look at the results of this, something which was very interesting to note. And they found that in terms of equity as well as central retinal thickness reduction, both were more or less the same. But where there was a difference was in the amount of polyp regression over the period of time and leading up to 1 month. And it showed that initial PDT with follow-up ranibizumab did a better job at regressing polyps than deferring it. And also in terms of the number of re-injections. So that was also lesser with initial PDT and follow-up ranibizumab. So what it seems to suggest is that it's a good idea when you're doing combination to get a grip or contain or reduce those polyps first up itself, and then perhaps you will have lesser number of re-injections leading up through the year and probably better polyp regression. Then anti-VEGF monotherapy came up. The first was, of course, ranibizumab monotherapy. Laptop study came up, looked at ranibizumab versus PDT head-on. Okay, and they found that ranibizumab had shown superiority over vertiporfin PDT in terms of acuity improvement, and a lot of prospective as well as retrospective studies suggested that there was efficacy for ranibizumab monotherapy. So while there was visual acuity improvement, everybody did agree that there was still a moderate effect only on complete polyp regression. And that's when aflibercept came in, and there were a lot of studies leading up to this PLANET study, like the WALT study. I'm not going to all those. PLANET looked at aflibercept monotherapy with and without rescue PDT. And essentially, the rescue PDT was only given to patients who met these criteria. And what were these? There was equity lesser than equal to 73 ETDR letters or Snellen 2040. Baseline BCVA change, loss, no change, or insufficient change, less than 5 letters, or that which was deemed to be not good enough, between 5 and 10 letters, and new or persistent fluid. And they found that aflibercept monotherapy resulted in equity gains of greater than 10 letters maintained over 2 years in patients with PCV, which was fairly impressive for an anti-VEGF monotherapy. And more than 30% of patients receiving this had complete polyp regressions at 1 year and 96 weeks too. So efficacy was then maintained with a treat and extend regimen in the second year also, reducing the number of re-injections. Bevacizumab, the study from Cho et al. Showed that it did a reasonably good job at equivalent efficacy compared to ranibizumab in terms of equity, macular edema, and regression of the polypoidal complex. So this is a case of a large serous PD with 1 injection of bevacizumab. You can see remarkable resolution, almost flapping out of that PD. So laser photocoagulation has also been done, and we've been doing it for extrafoveal PCV lesions, and there is limited evidence. Another case where you find we have done a focal photocoagulation for an extrafoveal leak PCV, and you find that remarkable resolution of those organized submacular hemorrhage going off completely with just 1 spot of laser. So it cannot. TTT is another low-cost option. Mitamuro showed that PTT was better than TT for visual acuity results and CRT reduction. It is a cost-effective therapy, and we've used it for patients who can't afford PDT. Massive submacular hemorrhage, you have this option of intravitreal tissue plasminogen activator and putting in gas, as we've done in this case with the massive SMH around the PEDs. And you see that the displacement of that hemorrhage, and with ranibizumab put in time, over 6 months, that PED completely resolved with a good result. So the treatment principle has given, initial combination therapy with 3 injections, and then combination can be followed up with ranibizumab monotherapy, as indicated, if PDT is not possible again, and the indications would be leakage from BV and polyps, large amount of SRF or exudation from the PD, ICG features, where you have an ambiguity of PCV and CNVM, and lesions are a combination of PCV and typical CNVM. Extrafoveal PCV, as I said, photocoagulation is an option. You follow up with FA, ICG, and OCD performed 3 months, and then if there's incomplete regression of polyps as assessed by the ICGA at 3 months after, you can go in either with combination or pure PDT. If there's complete regression but leakage on activity, anti-VEGF monotherapy, ranibizumab, or now, as we've seen, with aflibercept. So this was a large overall overarching kind of flow chart which we put out in our article. You can refer to it. So in summary, combination therapy appears by consensus in the literature currently to be the prime modality in managing PCV. PD3, through its angioocclusive properties, offers the best means of regressing the offending polyps, but reminder, not necessarily the BVNs. However, repeated PDT may lead to choroidal degeneration equity loss, especially if it's macular. Recurrence of these polyps do occur post-PDT. And anti-VEGF can be a very good follow-up option, may regress polyps completely in up to 25% of cases. Ranibizumab, and even more so now, aflibercept with the PLANET study, very efficacious in regressing this. Submacular hemorrhages can be dealt with pneumatic displacement and with TPA and in combination with anti-VEGF. Low-cost alternatives being TTT laser, but especially when lesions are extramacular. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for the nice talk. So we can take a few questions from the audience, please.
There are a group of patients with thin choroid and polyp. Where do these come? You are talking about all these things. There are quite a number of people you have seen thin choroid with polyp.
Yeah, I think even polyps have been described even in long-standing wet AMD related networks. So those are that, yes.
Subtype called polypoidal CNV.
Seen.
Yeah, I was about to.
Yes.
Yes.
That come out with an article wherein people with drusen and other features of dry AMD having polypoidal lesions with thin choroid also, like especially in the Asian scenario that is being described.
No, question is if it is symptomatic, and if there's subretinal fluid, and if that is so, then you may consider PDT. But
Treat like a wet AMD or treat like a PCV.
no, the common pathway is the same.
There are cases where thin choroid
Yeah, that's what I mean. So such cases we should be very careful in doing a PDT.
Yeah.
So myopic,
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Correct.
myopic cases do have PCV,
Yeah.
right? So
Myopic.
the two other aspects I wanted to elicit your opinion is that one, is it enough to say combination versus monotherapy, or we should go further and say reduced fluence PDT or full fluence PDT with the, and from our center we have shown that reduced fluence combined
Yes.
with anti-VEGF is better. Second thing is about the hemorrhagic complications of PDT.
Correct.
So in the East Asian
That's right.
population, where it's highly predominantly seen, the incidence is sometimes more than 20%.
Yes.
But in our center, we saw it's less than 10%.
There was
maybe
a
6%.
Japanese study which showed it up to, in 90 patients, I didn't, I reduced those slides, but up to 30%.
Right.
It is Imamura's survey article in 2010 said it is up to 30% in one very large series.
So
I
our
mean,
population
that's-
somehow
that's
behaves
not
better.
as bad.
So
Yeah.
That is 2010. Were they combining PDT with anti-VEGF or just doing PDT?
No, no, for PDT only. No, only PDT. Only PDT I'm talking of. Submacular. Yeah, that's what. Exactly. Correct.
How do you differentiate confluent drusen and pachytrusen?
There are multiple features that would be there, ma'am. Like confluent drusen, they are usually seen at the posterior pole area that we see in age-related macrodrusen. A pachytrusen is they are usually very scattered, and the distribution will be there throughout the posterior pole area, not only in the macular area, and they will be very much separated from each other. There will be a lot of pigmentary changes that we can see in patients with an age-related macular degeneration, but which are absent in patients with pachytrusen. And also, when we see the patients clinically, we'll see those choroidal vessels can be seen underlying the drusens associated with an AMD, because it also has an underlying geographic atrophy kind of feature. Whereas in case of pachytrusen, there will be underlying pachychoroid. So the choroid will give more of a reddish hue. That's it. Okay.
PDT and shown that only in 20% with anti-VEGF has 85% with PDT. So anti-VEGF injections for chronic CSR is not an option. When you have serous PDT under the macula also, we treat only the macula with reduced fluence PDT. Almost 90% of the time the fluid goes away and almost around 50% of the time the PED as I showed also disappears. We don't worry about growth in that patient.
The evidence for anti-VEGF is very low, and most of the studies have come from the Far East, from Korean studies. It hasn't been replicated otherwise.
Okay, so due to shortage of time, we'll conclude the session here so that the next IC can start. I thank you all very much for coming for the IC, and in case of any questions, we can just take the questions personally outside. Thank you so much.